Ladies and gentlemen,
Xiangling is dead. Mavuika is basically Pyro Raiden, if Raiden was good. She has both on-field DPS and off-field support capabilities, and seems to be great at both. You can freely switch between these roles at any time as well. Mavuika's off-field support capabilities are as simple as they are effective. Upon tapping her elemental skill, she enters her Night Soul Blessing state and starts summoning pillars of flame from above. These pillars strike enemies in 2-second intervals, they work off-field, are fully autonomous, which means they're not tied to coordinated attacks, and have around the same scaling as Pyro Nado for now, meaning they deal respectable damage while applying Pyro with no internal cooldown. Before you ask, yes, this Pyro application is slower than Xiangling's Pyro Nado because it doesn't hit as often, but it doesn't fucking matter. It's still fast enough for anything you'd realistically need it for. Mavuika's elemental skill has a 15-second cooldown, which is notably shorter than Pyro Nado's 20 seconds. Plus, since it's a skill, it doesn't need energy, it also appears to have good uptime from what I've seen. And speaking of energy, Mavuika's burst doesn't need it either. Instead, her burst uses a unique mechanic that's kind of trippy called Fighting Spirit. Mavuika's burst can be used with just 50 Fighting Spirit, but its power increases the more Fighting Spirit she has, up to 200. She accumulates Fighting Spirit whenever a party member consumes Night Soul points, which happens naturally for Natlan characters in their Night Soul Blessing state, Mavuika herself included. Mavuika can also generate extra Fighting Spirit by normal attacking, regardless of who's on field or actually doing the normal attacking. A synergy that immediately stands out is between Xilonen and Mavuika. When Xilonen activates her source samples, she actually consumes all 90 of her Night Soul points, which converts to 90 Fighting Spirit for Mavuika. This, combined with what Mavuika is able to generate for herself, can almost fully cap Mavuika's Fighting Spirit. Overall, Mavuika isn't necessarily tied to supporting Natlan DPS characters. Mark my words, the Mavuika plus Xilonen core is going to be everywhere. So what does Mavuika's burst actually do for her off-field support capability? First of all, it's a massive nuke, which means it deals a ton of damage when you cast it. Second, it grants a passive that's essentially a better version of Yelan's A4 passive. When you cast Mavuika's burst, it starts giving a 50% damage bonus to the on-field character and decays over 20 seconds instead of ramping up the other way around like Yelan does. This is obviously better because front load. Plus, since Mavuika's burst cooldown is only 18 seconds, you might actually never see the buff drop to 0. Just based off of her off-field capabilities alone, Mavuika is already a stronger, non-energy dependent, and higher quality of life alternative to Xiangling in any team that needs a consistent pyro application. Mualani bros, Xiangling is finished, Mavuika is just better. If you hold Mavuika's elemental skill, or tap it again while it's active, she enters her on-field DPS state, and in this state, she rides a literal motorcycle and gains non-overridable pyro infusion. While on the motorcycle, Mavuika zips around pretty quickly, and can deal AoE pyro damage with her attacks, or actually just by ramming into enemies, although that's probably not optimal for her combos, yeah? Remember the burst that we talked about earlier, the one that doesn't need energy and gives you a better Yelan buff? Well, it actually does more than that. A lot more. Just like Raiden, for a period after casting her burst, Mavuika gains infinite interruption resistance and massively increased damage on her infused pyro attacks while riding the motorcycle. And during this period after her burst, Mavuika also doesn't consume her Night Soul points, which can extend her Night Soul Blessing, which means, if you care, Mavuika can technically maintain full motorcycle uptime as long as she's fighting enemies and using her burst. Overall, Mavuika seems to be an easy-to-use, button-mashing character who obliterates enemies with massive AoE pyro damage when used as an on-field DPS. Her numbers that appeared in my dreams are of course very much subject to change, but all I'll say is right now, they are insanely high. It's also worth planting the idea that Mavuika's on-field abilities aren't necessarily tied to just playing her as a hyper carry. As I mentioned earlier, Mavuika can freely switch between her on-field and off-field states just by pressing her elemental skill again. This makes her one of the only DPS characters who could realistically run as a quote-unquote quick swap carry. She can use her burst, front load a ton of damage, swap out, and immediately contribute meaningful off-field support for whoever else she is used with. Teams with dual carries involving Mavuika, probably Xilonen, and some other DPS sound kind of great. The TLDR is that Mavuika is absolutely glorious. When I first dreamed of her as yet another pyro DPS, I was kinda disappointed. But somehow, she managed to be both that and an upgrade to Xiangling as an off-field pyro support. I'm quite happy. That said, I'm not as happy as I could be, because Bennett isn't going anywhere yet. Mavuika doesn't replace his buffs, and her best main DPS teams will probably still want him. However, she has ridiculously high base attack, which is the new highest in the game. She has constellations that boost it even further. I know, constellations boosting base attack. That's pretty strange, and I'll cover those later in another video. And her signature weapon with 741 base attack all scream gimme attack percent instead of Bennett's flat attack buff. I hope to God Hoyoverse has something new on the horizon. We're all sick and tired of being stuck in Bennett jail. Alright, that's all for now. Subscribe and stay tuned for more spicy Mavuika content. Go lift some weights and take care of yourself. Butterfur out. Also, where's the drip marketing?